Welcome to a new hashtag for the kids covering youth soccer, not just in Georgia, but all over the country. My name's Jason Longshore, joined by a familiar voice here on the SDH network, but in maybe a little bit different kind of capacity this time. Jon Akin, head coach, Oglethorpe University, but also Brookhaven FC executive director on the youth side. How's it going, Jon?
It's going really well, Jason. Thanks so much for having me today.
So we get to talk some of the things we talk offline about when we're sitting around after a game or in the off season about big picture stuff. We get to dig into that today. And after some of our previous shows here on the network, on the hashtag for the kids idea, I want to get into curriculum with you because we've talked about this many times about how clubs develop players and who's doing the right things and who, maybe is focused more on competition, all those kinds of aspects of the youth game that are being talked about nationwide. How hard is it in your role when you're creating a club to settle on a curriculum?
I think it comes down to, you have to even pull it back a page before you get into, what the activities are and what the planning is, what do you believe in? And, for those of us that believe that, everything really boils down to small-sided games and, how can you build tactical setups if technically you aren't proficient enough to do those types of things, which in turn limits your tactical ability. It starts there. It starts about, what does your ownership group, what does your, what does your board, what do your staff members believe in? And I think as long as you have a consistent vision, it will be pretty close and there won't, there's not a lot of variation in what you're trying to do. You can get along and you can kind of build from there. I think it's a challenge, but I think it goes down to getting the right people with the right philosophy together, and then it's a much easier process.
So let's go ahead and get specific about your end of it. What do you believe in when you're creating that curriculum? The cliche or not a cliche, I mean, the game's the greatest teacher. I mean, I think that, you've got to think, what are our kids, dealing with now? Youth development doesn't operate in a vacuum. It's in conjunction with what's going on in schools. It's in conjunction with how we operate as society now. Kids don't, get out of school at 2:30 and play till it gets dark. It's just not the way, we work, in society now. And I think it's a little unfortunate that the whole free play, is becoming, less and less a part of what, we're about. They're cutting PE out of schools and, so when we get these touch points and, we have members in our organization, we try to recreate that environment because so much of development happens in that free play setting, it happens within, certain constraints and there, you need to be working towards something, but holistically, what we're trying to do with Brookhaven is recreate those environments with some small tweaks and, stick to the small-sided model because, fundamentally when you do that, the kids are getting more touches, more repetitions. There's more chances for experimenting because you have more opportunities to do those types of things where it's not as much pressure. So in our club model, we try to recreate what's become absent in society as far as, youth development in general and kids in general. And then we obviously try to, overlay, if you will, best practices from U.S. Soccer, from Ajax, from, some of the top clubs in the world that have become very successful in those types of things. So we really try to take a very simple approach, but again, tying it back into what we all believe in is our staff and what we know works. So. And how often do you guys kind of revisit it? The game's always evolving, new elements come in, you see managers at the professional level kind of pushing things into different directions. How often is that process of, all right, this is what we do. Should we add? Should we subtract? Should we tweak?
Candidly, we're so young. We do have some older teams, but all of our, most of our teams at the academy level, U8 to U12,
And, those building blocks for us don't change. So we haven't had to address that issue, if you will. And in those in those, key specific ages, 7 to 12, I think the principles have never changed. I think people talk about them differently, but it's still small-sided. You look at some of the great quotes from, some of the best players in the world. They say, "Hey, who's your best friend growing up?" And they said, "Kicking a ball against the wall." And we try to, do those types of things, and obviously, a team training setting with, lots of repetitions and technique. That's what we stress.
I'm glad you mentioned the difference between the younger kids and the older kids, because I think tactically things will definitely change over time, but those foundational skills are so important. When you guys get to that point and you have your academy teams and you start to have that, maybe the ugly head of competition rear up a little bit, how do you manage staying true to those ideals of how you want your teams to play, but also dealing with winning and losing?
Sure. And I think that's you got to battle the perception, and that perception comes from a lack of education, not by anybody's fault, but, a lot of the parents that we deal with, and, parents in general don't really understand, that technique and development are more important than anything. Then you've got these business entities and leagues coming into play saying, "Hey, this league is better than that league," and you muddy the waters on, what's really important. So we try to, combat that through education, with our membership, and show them over time that, by focusing on some of those things, sometimes you might not win a game in your first season with us because we're trying to do the right things. But over time, after a year, 2 or 3, the winning takes care of itself, to some degree, and you continue to have to educate. But I think that's part of the process. And winning is important. Winning is very important. And at the highest levels, winning is really, in some ways the only thing that's important. But that increases, that the importance of winning increases over time. And it's a much more narrow window than, in reality, than what is adhered to. You've got these clubs that say they've got soccer rankings, and, they're the number 1 team in the state. I heard from somebody a couple days ago that they're taking a U9 team to Richmond, Virginia to, I think it was in the carpool line. I was talking to another parent and said they were taking their U9 kid to Richmond, and they want to see what they're doing. They're playing a team from Texas and a team playing a team. And I, casually smiled and said, "That's great. I'm excited for you guys." But inside, I was sitting here going, what are we doing here? That has nothing to do with development. That has to do with ego of parents. That has to do with, clubs, selling some things that really aren't true with youth development. That's part of the problem with the landscape. So, again, winning is important. How you categorize quality and challenging and meaningful games are all important. But we're talking about 15, 16, 17, 14 right. Below. It's so much about technique, and we see even how that translates. I get kids reaching out to me, saying, "Hey, I play on this league team," and I go out and watch a game, and the kid's one-footed. He's only playing one, with 1 foot. And I said, in my head, I'm thinking, what have you been, what has this club been doing with regards to, overall development, even though the team is playing and what is perceived to be a high level. It's just, in some ways it's comical. But again, that goes back to really understanding what it's about and what's going to continue to, move the needle forward, with regards to a player's certain trajectory.
I think what people maybe are starting to wrap their heads around a little bit more is that type of stuff, being able to use both feet, being able to use, like we talked about with Alan Ewing on the futsal side, using the sole of the foot, being able to manipulate the ball. You do have not a finite window to develop that, but it has to be developed at the younger ages, or you're probably going to be limited for the rest of your time as a player.
Yeah, and there's some yes to what you and Alan were talking about. Absolutely right. I mean, in general, yes, the if you're developing that soccer IQ at 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12, that's critical. However, there are always exceptions. And some kids pick up the game late, but they're very athletic and, kinesthetically aware, and, their trajectory is a little different than, the general kid. But it is critical. You can develop those things, but it's more, you can overcome those challenges by not creating that early, by committing and spending more hours. But that's up to the kid. The model of 2 or 3 practices a week aren't going to change along that way. It's going to be more, what do you do to develop those types of things, the soccer IQ, the sole of the foot, the inside the foot, the left foot, the volleys, all these types of things. What are you doing outside of those structured training sessions? And you can overcome that. But it's more about, how much does a kid want to do it? And then I would even tie that back into passion and, checking in and having a pulse for a kid / team / age group / club's passion for the game. Are the kids doing it because their parents stick them into it, or they really enjoy it? And we've got to maintain, and we have a responsibility to try to foster that passion for the game into our curriculum as much as, a left foot or a right foot. I think that's a very forgotten piece of this. And I think we have a responsibility as coaches to develop those types of things. I mean, I think a lot of, what I've accomplished in the game is because I had a love affair with the ball and a love affair with the game. And I wasn't always the best, but I continue to develop because I loved it. And we need to insert that into curriculum as much as everything else.
Yeah, that's a really key part, and it's something that maybe is one of the harder things to manage. Something you said specifically about checking in with players and that individual development that occurs within a club. So you have your club curriculum, you have your idea, you want all your coaches to do certain things, but then you have that one player who might be a late bloomer, might have picked things up really early. You might need to, have that conversation about working on certain elements. How does a club of Brookhaven FC size kind of manage the individual development that goes on within the club?
In my opinion, it's a great thing about having a small community-based club. We're not big, and we don't intend on becoming a huge club. It's more about pushing the players on that we have. So, specifically, we do player evaluations before the season, after the season. So we kind of keep a closer pulse on kids and nothing elaborate, just kind of checking in and giving a few specific points and probing them a little bit and asking things like, hey, how do you feel? And, what are you looking forward to next season? And try to, using some of those guided questions to kind of help connect with that player. But with regards to that, we, if a player is very doing really well on a third team or a second team, we give them the chance to train with a team up. Or, if the kid's I have a kid who's very good on with the team that I coach, and we let him play up with a top team on the other age group, and just to kind of get a taste for that. We push players towards, ODP and some different, things to continue to whet their appetite for their passion. So there are specific things that we can do. Like I said, the player evaluations before each, fall season, after each fall season, spring, so forth. And then there's the, we need to push them up internally in a more challenging environment. And maybe that's playing a couple years up, or maybe the kid's struggling a little bit, for whatever reason, emotionally, is from things going on at home, lack of confidence. Sometimes we can put that player down in the academy ages, age group or a team to kind of gain that confidence back up and that passion, because it's so important.
Yeah, that's all so critical, and it's got to be easier to do at a smaller club as opposed to a huge club where maybe the individuals can get lost in the mix a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, it is, it is a real challenge, doing it in a small club, and it's obviously it's exponentially harder with, how many more players you do, and you got multiple locations and things like that. So there's some unique conversations going on in the landscape of Georgia soccer. Academy ages, and part of that, that passion, the connectivity. When let me give you an example. So, if we're going to go play, UFA, we'll take our academy teams and we'll all play, the girls will play at home while the boys play away. And that's pretty cool. Your 9s are going to play, your 10s are going to play, your 11s are going to play. And it's easy to kind of, move some of those teams around. And we talked about curriculum and adhering to that. And then all your coaches are there, and they can stay for, all morning and watch all the age groups. So you can see that connectivity and those philosophies, in real time and in place, or whether they're not there, if a coach is kind of going off the rails and, kind of done his own things, it's very easy when you're all there. And then you get into these U13 to U19 age groups and, every team is kind of separate, right? You got a team in Savannah, then you got a team in North Georgia, then you got a team, crossover. So, an idea that's been socialized in some leagues, it's happening. The select model mirrors the academy model that we're already doing, where basically, and this is happening in some states, your U9s, if we're going to go play UFA, our U9s are going to play all the way through U9s to U19s.
Right. And
they might host in that. And then that way, if you really want an accurate picture of what that's going to look like, that's the way to do it. Right, where everybody's there that day, you can manipulate player movement. All the coaches are there. It's an all-day event, kind of like a festival, mentality, and you could do that every weekend. That's not the model. That's not the model that we have right now. But I think it's really cool to think about. I mean, we're already doing it. Everybody in the state's doing it basically at the academy level. There's some changes that have to happen, and I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility to kind of implement something like this in the near future, which I think goes back to the fun, the connectivity, the philosophy, the passion about a club. Now that would be really specific for, a smaller club that's starting out to compete, like, one of the top clubs, if not the top club in the state, like a UFA. But you could do certain things like, their top team, might play, an age group up against us in some of those matchups. Right. So there's some nuances that certainly need to be developed, or, you can partner up clubs and things like that to play some of the bigger clubs, and 2 medium-sized clubs playing a bigger one, and some things like that. And those ideas are being socialized, now among club leaders at the moment. But I think some of those are very practical ways to implement some of the challenges that we have, and some of the things that you and I talked about a little earlier in the podcast.
Yeah, the game's in an interesting place because there's this push-pull, and it really depends on who you talk to, because you look at what a country like the Netherlands does, or even a country the size of Germany and what they've done, and how it's very top-down in terms of the way the game is taught, the way the curriculum's developed. Everybody's doing the same things. And then you look at some other countries where things are spread out, and it's power to the clubs, and they do things the way they want to do it, and the way their individual people in those clubs want to do. What do you think is the way here? I mean, is it possible to do a top-down model in the United States, or even within a state in the U.S., or does it need to be driven at the club level?
That's, unless the federation's going to do something dramatic, I don't think the top-down model. And what do you mean by top-down? Do you mean I think
following like the same curriculum is what you see, and even in the development academy, you get some complaints at times with the request for everybody to play the same way, even at that level where it is more about competition. Then that becomes the balance of, well, if everybody has to play the same shape, I can't adjust based off the way my team plays or my team's strengths are.
Right.
And that adds complication to it.
Yeah, and I think you have to give each coach or club the latitude to do that, because, if it is,
playing for points and things like that, and you don't have, the superior players to do this. I mean, you have to do something different if you're trying to get that result, and it's, again, it goes back to philosophy, which I started with, is what's the club committed to? They can take if they know they're playing a superior side, but they know that playing against a superior side, doing what they're doing and committed to it with a, 14, 15-year-old kid over time, that's going to be more valuable to being committed to that in a tougher environment, taking you lose the battle, but you're going to win the war, so to speak, because you might try to sell that player at 18. Let me give you an example on, people are doing it right. The kid Ephraim, who is got a couple weeks at Man United. I mean, he was with UFA for 4 or 5 years, I think, before he jumped over to Atlanta United. And, I think until we start giving these clubs the ability to, get these rider clauses and, are rewarded for these development, we're going to be continue to be shackled by, hey, what kind of results are you getting? I think that's going to be the one that solves all of it. When clubs are given the reward for developing that, which I know could take us in a 3-day podcast.
I think that's starting to actually. I think there's
we'll
progress. I think that's starting to get there now that the right record keeping is being held for FIFA requirements at the state and the national side of things. So I'm with you. That's critical, because then it does change. Then you can have a youth club that says, we're not worried about trophies. We're worried about developing players, and we're going to bring in revenue based off how we develop players.
Yeah, and when that's done, that's going to be the final stroke, which I think is going to. And the interesting thing, the landscape, some clubs won't really change much at all.
Right.
To be rewarded for that, and they should be committed for that. But some clubs, if their success is based upon championships and results, if they want to be rewarded for selling a player off later, they're going to have to completely change their model. So I think it's kind of if this thing's coming, and I sure hope it is, kind of get your house in order if you want to reap the rewards on what player development is really all about.
It's so interesting right now because, I mean, you've been through this as a player and now as a coach and an executive director and DOC and all the different roles that you play. The game feels so different than it did when MLS started, and just take that as a marker in 1996. And maybe we're starting to catch up. Does it feel that way to you?
I think so. I mean, I think the amount of support that the MLS has generated, there's certainly, a pecking order. I mean, I've seen it unfold. When I was playing for Charleston, we were competitive with, a lot of the MLS teams, being a top tier USL team. And that's clearly, the MLS has gone, a different level, and there's clearly a pecking order. And I think, the MLS and the USL tiers and things like that. So I think, I've seen that unfold, and I think that is also helping trickle down. But there's so many moving parts with the CBA stuff that we talked about prior to the call. Mm-hmm. The legal fight for the youth development model, the youth landscape in itself with these different league entities that are integrating or not integrating with state associations. There's so many moving parts. It's going to be, I think it's just time. I think it will sort itself out. But to your point, it is absolutely better than it has been before. And I think it's a lot of that has to do with education. And what I mean by that is, people our age now have kids, and they played when the game was better than it was in the 70s and 80s and things like that. So they kind of understand, good coaching versus bad coaching in general. Mm-hmm. And, the consumer, if you will, is more educated as a base. Right. They still have a lot to learn, I think, in general with regards to youth development specifically, but I think they have a better base understanding, and they can kind of see through some of the false pretenses, if you will, about those things. And I think it leads to a better understanding. And And it's exciting. I think we're, to your point, I think we're getting there. I think we're much further along as a reference point than 1996. But it could be that long again until we get it right, which, isn't the end of the world, and I think 20 years from now, I think if some of those things that I mentioned are really addressed, I think we could be in a really, really good place 20 years from now.
Yeah, I mean, it's stuff that comes up in countries that have established programs where things can get kind of sideways and get off the rails a little bit, and they have to reset. It's fascinating to look at this from a big picture perspective, and we'll do these from time to time on the podcast for sure, where the conversation can go wherever. But I want to finish with this. We'll bring it back to curriculum a little bit. What's your recommendation if you were starting a club from scratch and you could create the coaching curriculum, education, that side of the club to develop the players you want to develop? What would be your main bullet points that you would put in place?
So you mean if I could start a club from scratch again?
You're starting from scratch, kind of like you have, but let's say like today, you're starting a club from scratch today, brand new.
I think it's leading in with education, trying to set the expectations of parents, reasonable expectations for those parents and for youth development, because it's not linear, and parents need to understand that. So you need to kind of coach up your audience, your membership, if you will. Second thing I would say is absolutely, de-emphasizing results, if you're starting with the youngest groups, and understanding and helping them understand that it is a long journey in the game, and maintaining that close relationship with your members and your families, and helping them understand that passion more than anything for the game and a love affair with the ball are going to carry players further than anything, any league they could potentially play in. So I would say sticking with that and the small-sided mentality young, it would be all starting points. So educating your audience and your membership, checking in and setting the expectation, the passion is important, and then adhering to, the models of, the guy I mentioned before, Horsfine, about, small-sided games and how that will basically be the building block of everything in the game moving forward. And if you do those types of things and you can master the ball, you'll end up in the game where your genetics and your passion take you.
And what you guys are doing at Brookhaven, and then following it on from you, what you're doing at Oglethorpe with players who are moving on into higher levels, that foundation is so important. And if you do it right, these guys can have the ability, and women as well, to go on and play at any level if the foundation's built right.
Absolutely. Well said.
That'll wrap it up here on Hashtag for the Kids. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Jon, I'm sure we'll be doing these kind of on a regular basis because it's fun to pick your brain.
Love it, Jason. I'm happy to be a part of it anytime. Thank you so much for having me today.